Welcome to the Depth Dive. We cut through the noise, stack up the sources for you, and really try to pull out the most compelling insights. And today, we're plunging into something pretty universal, something that touches everyone, but it's also deeply personal. We're talking about grief. It's that emotion we've all had to navigate after losing someone. Sometimes it just drains all the joy out of life, right? Or it can completely paralyze you. And then in some cultures, it's even seen as like a way of honoring the person who's passed. It just feels like such an undeniable part of loss, doesn't it? But what if? What if
Yes.
there's this whole other dimension to it, one we almost never think about?
That's exactly what the sources we're looking at today are suggesting. And, what's really fascinating, quite surprising actually, is this idea that the departed, they might also experience grief for the loved ones they've left behind, as they're trying to adjust to their new environment.
Wow.
Yeah, the insights we're exploring today propose that grieving can, and apparently often does, occur on both sides of that divide.
Okay, that's a really profound shift in perspective. So our mission for this deep dive then is to really explore this spiritual understanding of grieving, what it means for us, for those who've passed on, and how our emotions might have these far-reaching effects that we rarely, if ever, even consider. Let's really unpack this. So let's start with us, the living. And what these sources describe as the ethereal environment that grief creates around us, they say that from this spiritual viewpoint, the actual imagery tied to grieving, even if it's coming from a place of deep love, is one of gloom.
Exactly. And it's not just, a metaphor for feeling sad. Think of it more like an invisible but very real, dense energy field.
Mm.
Our sources explain that gloom literally depicts this sort of unwholesome atmosphere that gets produced and, well, it surrounds a person who's grieving. It's described as a dark, heavy environment, almost like an energetic fog hanging around them.
Wow, okay, so it's not just a feeling inside, it's something that actually shapes the invisible space around you. And here's where it gets really interesting, right? This dark, gloomy environment.
Yeah.
It doesn't just sit there passively. It acts like a kind of magnet.
Precisely. That heavy, low vibrational energy that you're putting out, it attracts correspondingly gloomy forms. Things like concentrated thought forms of sadness, despair, maybe depression, that kind of thing. And what's maybe even more crucial is that it also attracts discarnate spirits.
Discarnate spirit.
Yeah, beings who have passed on but are still deeply tied to the earthly plane for various reasons. And they apparently thrive in these kinds of dense environments because their own energy vibrates at a similar sort of low level. There's a homogeneity.
Okay, so these entities, they're drawn to this gloomy atmosphere you've created, but why would they want us to keep grieving? What's the benefit for them?
Well, that's where this idea of sustaining elixir comes in. It's quite a concept. The sources describe it as these entities actually, well, feeding on the intense emotional output of grief. Your sustained sadness, that powerful emotional energy, literally becomes a kind of energy source for them.
So it creates this feedback loop. They encourage the grief because it sustains them.
Exactly. It's a potent, self-reinforcing cycle. Their presence reinforces the gloomy emotions, encouraging the person to keep grieving, which in turn provides more of that sustaining elixir.
That's a powerful thought, and frankly, a little unsettling. So if this goes on, if it's uncontrolled, what are the potential consequences for the person who's grieving?
Well, the consequences can be pretty severe, according to these sources. These strong negative emotions, they don't just mess with your mind. They take a really profound toll on your physical body, too. Our sources actually highlight cases where uncontrolled, really prolonged grief could even lead to physical death. You sometimes hear those tragic reports.
Yeah, you do hear stories like that, like a young mother who just couldn't seem to recover after losing an infant child, and eventually she passes away too. People say she died of a broken heart.
Exactly. And from this perspective, there's a potential spiritual component contributing to that physical breakdown. It's not just psychological or emotional.
Okay. And what if? What if the grief isn't just sadness, but it's mixed with anger? Feelings of injustice, rebellion, why me? Why did this happen?
Right. Well, if those thoughts of rebellion or that feeling of unfairness about the death accompany the grief, that's described as being like putting out an even stronger call. It can attract even more rebellious and, frankly, sinister entities.
Oh, wow.
And these darker forces can then apparently fuel irrational feelings and actions in the mourner. Things directed towards others, often for reasons the person themselves can't even comprehend. We've probably all heard stories or maybe even seen those really inexplicable outbursts or irrational behaviors between family members at funerals sometimes.
Yeah, tensions can run really high.
Well, from this viewpoint, there could be a spiritual undercurrent feeding into that discord, amplified by the grief in these attracted entities.
This brings up a really important point then. Does all this mean that just missing someone, missing a dearly departed loved one, is that wrong? Because that feels so incredibly natural.
No, not at all. And that's a really vital distinction the sources are careful to make. Missing a person is fundamentally different from grieving for them in this context.
Okay, that's crucial to clarify. So how is it different? When you miss someone, you might think about the good times, right? The funny things they did.
Exactly.
And those memories, even if there are tears, they can also bring smiles, a sense of warmth, maybe even joy.
Precisely. And that evokes a lighter, more expansive kind of energy, a completely different vibration than that heavy gloom. And that lighter, ethereal environment, well, it attracts beautiful forms and entities, spiritual helpers, you could call them, positive influences. And these positive entities are described as helping both the departed and the loved ones still on Earth to genuinely
Well,
to let go.
letting go.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because letting go is exactly what conventional grief counselors often talk about as one of the most vital steps in the healing process.
Yeah, that's true. It really is.
So it seems like this spiritual perspective kind of aligns with, or maybe provides a deeper layer to, that practical psychological advice.
Okay, so we've looked at the impact on the living person. Now let's shift perspective and look at the other side of that divide. What happens to the person who has departed when we are grieving intensely back here? Our sources say that deep grieving creates a really strong emotional binding tie. Is that right? Back to the person or people on Earth.
Yes, that's the concept.
Yeah.
And the strength of that binding tie, it actually dictates how far the departed soul can really move away from the, let's call it the spiritual vicinity of their loved one on Earth.
So what does that mean for the departed person? Is it difficult for them?
It could be incredibly challenging, according to this view. The linkage basically means they can become sort of stuck. They might be trying frantically but unsuccessfully to make their presence felt, maybe to offer comfort, or just let loved ones know they're okay. But the person on Earth, often being in that depressed, heavy state of grief, they might only get a very fleeting sense of a presence, if anything.
And they might just dismiss it.
Yeah, or unconsciously just push it aside because their own emotional state is so overwhelming.
So it's not just us being impacted by these negative forces attracted by the gloom. The departed soul is actually in that same environment with them, maybe even more directly exposed.
Precisely. Because they are now in that non-physical realm, they're even more directly exposed to those negative forces that were attracted by the grief. They share the same environment.
That sounds quite dangerous for them.
It can be. This exposure means the departed one can easily become a victim of the antics or manipulations of these negative entities. They can be influenced into activities or states of mind that keep them fixated on the earthly plane, keep them tied here.
So they remain earthbound.
Essentially, yes. They're energetically anchored here, unable to release that bond formed by the intense grief, and they can't really turn their gaze towards the lighter, more developed regions of their new environment where their journey should be continuing. And there's a further danger mentioned. Under the influence of these darker forces, the departed might succumb to other activities, things that keep them tied here, activities that maybe no longer have anything to do with their initial desire to console or connect.
So they get sort of sidetracked, pulled into other negative patterns.
That's the risk described. They become entrapped by the earth plane itself, rather than progressing spiritually.
This really underscores the importance of spiritual maturity, doesn't it? Or awareness, maybe. What's the difference for a departed soul who is more spiritually aware when their loved ones are grieving back on Earth?
Right, that's a key contrast. A spiritually mature or, let's say, aware departed one would certainly sense those strong emotions coming from Earth. They wouldn't be oblivious.
Yeah.
But because they have a deeper awareness of the continuity of life, of consciousness existing beyond physical death, they would be more attuned to focusing on their own continuing development and their new environment. They would understand the bigger picture.
So they could sort of detach from that pull.
They'd be more likely to, yes. They would more quickly turn their gaze away from Earth, metaphorically speaking, and not allow those strong binding emotions from grieving relations back here to hold them back or anchor them. They understand their journey has to continue.
Yes. Okay, so pulling this all together, what does it really mean for us living our lives here? Ultimately, these sources seem to be underscoring that the laws of creation, these spiritual principles, they just work as they're designed, not necessarily as we might wish them to work in our moments of pain.
That's a good way to put it. The fundamental principle seems to be Strong negative emotions, like intense grief,
Mhm.
consistently create that gloomy environment. That environment attracts negative forces.
Hmm.
And when we're gripped by that kind of overwhelming grief, it's almost like we've unintentionally, lowered the bridge or opened a door.
Allowing those forces to influence and affect us,
Right.
and potentially the departed, too.
Exactly. We become vulnerable in that state.
And if we connect this to the really big picture,
Hmm.
the sources present a conclusion that's, well, it's pretty provocative, isn't it?
It really is.
They suggest that if humanity, as a whole, truly recognized and gained real conviction, not just belief, but conviction, that life on Earth is just a short spell.
A temporary phase.
Yeah, and that life absolutely exists and continues after physical death. Then, they suggest, there would essentially be no room for grieving, at least not in the way we currently understand it.
It's a radical thought, definitely. A world without that kind of debilitating grief.
How do they help us understand that? How could we possibly reach that kind of perspective?
Well, they offer a rather beautiful analogy to help illustrate it. Think of a mother whose child is going off to college.
Okay.
Now, of course, she misses her child. There's a sense of separation, maybe some sadness at the empty room. But at the same time, she's also immensely happy, right? Happy and proud that her child has gone off to acquire more skills, to grow, to become, a more capable, productive member of society.
Yeah, there's pride and excitement for their future, too.
Exactly. And she would absolutely look forward to their next meeting, maybe during a holiday break or phone calls, or eventually after graduation. There's an anticipation of reunion.
I see where this is going. So, in a similar way, we should perhaps look forward to a joyful reunion with our dearly departed loved ones.
That's the perspective offered, seeing them as having simply gone ahead of us on the much longer road of life.
And therefore, we shouldn't keep them bound here, keep them stuck through the intensity of our grief.
Precisely. Freeing them and freeing ourselves in the process.
So, the core takeaway from this deep dive seems to be this maybe quite challenging idea that our emotional state during loss, particularly intense grief, doesn't just impact us. It potentially really affects the ongoing journey of those who have passed on.
It suggests our inner world has consequences far beyond our own experience. Which leads us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to really ponder.
What if? What if truly embracing this idea, the conviction of life's continuation beyond death? What if that could fundamentally shift your own experience of loss? Could it transform it from that deep, heavy, potentially binding grief into something more like a sense of hopeful, even joyful anticipation, thereby freeing both yourself and perhaps also freeing those you miss so dearly?